Northman, Horror of the Mud, by Elias Lamshaw. In the early hours of a quiet morning, the sleek, slender form of a Northman longship glided across the glassy surface of the water. It had a single white sail and was adorned with a figurehead carved in the shape of a grinning dragon. The longship drove up onto the Mirren shore, and her crew of 5 oarsmen and their leader leapt over the sides. Their leather boots crashed against the sand and shell-crusted beach. They were dressed in yellow and red quilted jackets and carried with them curved axes and shields decorated with the motif of an eagle's talon. Their leader, being the oldest among them, had a gray beard and sharp eyes. The oarsmen were little more than young pups and barely had scruff on their faces. Einar wasn't sure why his cousin had given him an entire squadron of boys who were still wet behind the ear for this mission. There was not one veteran among them, and he felt out of place in their presence. "You two, stay with the boat," he demanded of the 2 youngest members of the party, Arn and Soon. The boys groaned. There was no glory to be had in guarding the boat, no riches to claim, no chance to engage in sacred battle. Einar snorted. Battle? There was no battle. They were raiding a village along the coast, and if they were lucky, they would probably run into a handful of ill-equipped town guards. Even a few untested pups like these should be able to handle that. There was no glory in this mission. Not for them, not for him. The 2 boys complained nonetheless, and were intent to drive home their desire to be part of the raid until he gave them a stern look that put them in their place. There was no more time for arguing. Einar and the 3 remaining members of his party strode across the rock and shell-crusted beach in the direction of the village. They followed the curve of the beach, and on the other side they spotted a cluster of small, low buildings in the distance. The village was nothing more than a miserable collection of small houses, a tavern, a church, and in the center of it was a well. There was no light from any of the buildings except the church. Firelight poured out of the stained glass windows and took on a strange, otherworldly hue. Perfect, thought Einar. The villagers were probably in mass, which would make it easier to take them by surprise and keep them contained. "Keep quiet and follow my lead," he snarled to his pups. Raids like this were what kept the Eagle Talon clan going. The northern regions from which they hailed were barren lands. Crops were almost impossible to grow in the hard, rocky soil. Any animal that could be captured with ease on the island had been hunted to near extinction by the various clans. The rest were either too quick or dangerous. Raids brought in money and sometimes even food that could keep a clan fed for months. If anyone was willing to sell to them, that was. Most of the clans had burned their bridges with outsiders long ago. That was a different problem for someone else to figure out, though. The 4 warriors crept past a house with shuttered windows and a door that hung slightly ajar. Specks of dried mud were splashed all around the entryway and the windows, as if there had been a mudslide concentrated straight into those points. They passed the tavern and the well, both speckled with more flakes of dried mud. The tavern's windows had been shuttered tightly, and the door pulled closed. No smoke filtered out from the stone chimney, and there was no sound from inside. No revelry, no dog barking. It was quiet in a way that it shouldn't have been. Around the well were deep ruts in the soil, as if something large had been drugged there and dumped down into it, or had climbed down there itself. He couldn't explain it, but his gut told him that something bad had happened here. Subconsciously, his grip tightened on his axe and shield. He suddenly felt as if there were eyes on him. Not human eyes, not eyes in the normal sense of the word, but eyes that could see everything, everywhere, all at once. They stared at him and his pups from the empty doorways and the dark depths of the well. There was a presence here, something that he couldn't see but alive nonetheless. It was aware of their intrusion and was stalking them, perhaps waiting for a moment to strike. Was he losing his nerve? Had he gone soft? As wet behind the ears as these pups he was supposed to be leading? Or did he simply have the wisdom to understand when something was out of place? He stepped away from the well and motioned his men forward. Let them take the church now and be done with this place. Lonier paused beside the well that Einar had been peering down into. What had the old warrior seen? What had he heard? The well seemed innocent enough, but there was a subtle shift on the veteran's face. He had picked something up that Lonier couldn't detect. He stared into it for several moments, trying to glean any information he could, trying to understand what had put the veteran on edge, and now he was on edge too, but for a different reason. The well appeared empty, a black hole that seemed to fall away into nothingness. There was no light or sound emanating from within, nothing to give a hint of danger. It rattled him that his instincts and nerves were so underdeveloped that they could not catch anything. He looked away from the well and saw the others were moving on without him. They were already moving to surround the church and prepare the attack. He needed to fall in line or Einar would have his head, and he'd never be allowed on another raid. He tried to lift his boot, but found that it was stuck. Looking down, Lonier saw that his feet had sunk into a thick, watery mud that he hadn't noticed before. It was already up to his ankles, and any attempt to move his feet only drove them deeper into it. By the Warfather, not now, he thought to himself. Come on, damn mud. The mud suddenly began to squeeze around his feet and ankles, pressing in on every square inch with tremendous force. It was a strange sensation. It wasn't like he'd sank deeper into the mud and his boots had simply gotten stuck. It was as if someone was grabbing onto him, squeezing his feet and ankles with a deathly grip. He tried again to lift his feet, but this time they wouldn't even budge, and the mud had somehow risen above the lip of his boots. He couldn't even remove them. The brown sludge was sliding down into them, and he could feel the cold muck against his skin. It then began to rise quickly, passing his shins and climbing up to his knees. Now sensing the danger he was in, but not fully understanding it, he tried to call out to the others. The mud before him suddenly rose like a tidal wave, and it slammed into his chest. He tried to scream, but it invaded his mouth and his throat. It slid into his nostrils and his ears. It pressed into his eye sockets until the world turned black and there was nothing but excruciating pain. The mud surrounded his body and pressed in on him, but he also felt that his body was in free fall. He had been pushed down the well and was falling through the pitch-black darkness into the void below. Except it wasn't a void. He heard the splashing of water as he struck it, but the mud clung tightly to his body and refused to let go. He choked and gasped for air, but it was already inside his lungs. He couldn't even scream. Einar pressed his ear to the wooden door of the church and listened. There was no sound coming from inside the church. He couldn't hear anyone praying or talking, not even a cough or a sniffle. Something was terribly wrong with this place. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he could feel it deep down in his bones. Every day was a fight for survival when you were a Northman. You fought the cold, your hunger, the dangerous beasts that inhabited your land, and each other. There was never peace. A lull in the fighting was only a brief pause as you or your opponent sought leverage against the other. This constant life of conflict led to a higher level of perception and understanding of danger. The signs were there if you understood how to read them. Einar understood how to read them very well. He looked back over his shoulder, intending to give orders, when he noticed that Lonier was missing. The boy was a smart one, and he had the good sense to observe and listen to the teachings of his elders. It was unlike him to stray from his duties. "Where is Lonir?" he whispered. The others looked around and saw that their companion was missing. Neither of them had seen him wander off. It was as if he had simply vanished without a trace. Einar understood what needed to happen next. The pups wanted to spread out and search for him, but they didn't understand that this would only bring about the same result. Lonir was, until proven otherwise, already dead. "The church, now," he commanded. The pups moved sluggishly, not wanting to leave behind a brother. He commended their commitment to one another and to their resolve. In his younger days, he would have felt the same way. But he wasn't a young pup anymore, and he needed them to listen to him, or they would all die. Of this, he was certain. "There will be no chance for revenge if we are all slain like lambs," he said. "We need to know what we're up against, and the church is a fine place to make a stand. Inside, now, all of you." He pulled open the door, which creaked on rusted hinges, and bright yellow firelight spilled out and splashed over them like water. It raced down the ancient, weather-worn steps, but dissipated before reaching the final step. Through the open doorway sat a large chamber with rows of wooden pews running along the central path. A long, red carpet ran from the doorway to the altar, where the priest's prayer book was held open to the most recently read passage. Behind the altar was a brightly colored and heavily detailed mural depicting the events of some passage from the book. All of this was illuminated by a pair of wrought iron chandeliers suspended from the ceiling and rows of torches along the side walls. "So you have finally come," said the sole occupant of the church, a priest dressed in a simple brown robe. He was unarmed and looked to be quite thin. His face was covered in a week-old stubble. "Where is our comrade? Where are the people that live here?" demanded Tove. "Dead. All dead, I'm afraid," said the priest glumly. "What happened here? What killed them?" asked Einar. "Hubris. Fear. My hubris and fear," replied the priest. "You speak in riddles," said Gorm. "Talk plainly." "There is a beast outside these walls. It was summoned to protect this town from the likes of you, but it couldn't be controlled. It fought against the shackles that bound it to the will of its master and broke free. The town was consumed, and all that is left is me." "Who summoned the beast?" asked Einar. "I did. I was born with a gift for the magical arts, but my talents were limited. Where others excelled, I fell short, and I was kicked out of the university. I found my place here as a priest instead." "That doesn't explain why you summoned a monster," said Tove. "Because I was afraid to lose the only people who ever accepted me. The people that gave me a chance to become something. I have seen the aftermath of your raids, the senseless slaughter. Our humble village resides on the coast. I wouldn't allow that to happen here. I would have protected them." Einar clenched his teeth. This was the cost of playing with magic and consorting with demons. His people had long ago shunned magic and its foul users. Anyone who toyed with forces outside of mortal control was put to death. The only exception were the oracles ordained by the Warfather himself and given the gift of sight. "You killed your own people," said Tove. "As I said, it was my hubris and fear." "Why hasn't the beast killed you, then?" asked Einar. "I suppose I do have some talent after all," said the priest with a sad chuckle. "When the beast broke free, I was able to place an enchantment on this building to protect it. It cannot cross the barrier, as you can see," said the priest as he gestured towards the doorway. 3 figures stood in the doorway. At first, Einar thought they were simply standing in the shadows. He couldn't make out the features of their faces or the clothes they were wearing. Upon closer inspection, He realized that the three figures standing at the doorway were caked in a thick layer of mud. There was something painfully familiar about the shapes of the bodies beneath the mud. The proportions. He knew in an instant that they were his pups. Arn, Soon, and Lonir. "You!" he cried as he turned his attention back to the priest. He leveled his axe and prepared to strike. "I will have your head." The priest bowed his head. "You may take it if you wish, but the enchantment only works if I'm still alive. You kill me, and you will all die." "What is the alternative? To hide in here like a coward until we starve or your enchantments fail?" The priest didn't answer. The three figures in the doorway rocked and swayed on unsteady legs. The thing controlling their corpses probably had no concept of legs, or a body that couldn't change or mold into whatever shape it wanted. Einar stared at them. Sometimes the faces of his pups would bleed through. A momentary glimpse beneath the layer of mud. Pale skin and empty sockets stared back at him as if begging him to set them free, before being swallowed once more by the brown and gray curtain. "This thing will die by my hands," said Einar, turning his attention back to the priest. "And so will you." The priest smiled grimly. Spoken like a true Northman. Part 2. "You summoned the thing. What do you know of the beast?" "It is an earth elemental. It can change shape and size at will, assuming it can touch soil. It doesn't have emotions or thoughts, as we know them. It is much closer to the truth to say that it is a predator, a hunter stalking prey. Its motives are completely unknowable in this regard, as it doesn't eat. It simply kills to kill," said the priest. "And you unleashed this beast on your own village?" snapped Gorm, appalled. "When controlled with the correct incantations, an earth elemental is a powerful guardian. You can give it your own goals and it will follow them without question. I obviously lacked the strength and knowledge to properly bound the beast to myself, and its will took over. It broke free." "Could you use these incantations to shackle the beast once more? Bring it under your control entirely, or at least long enough for us to trap or kill it?" asked Einar. "No," said the priest. "When the bond was broken, the creature's entire soul was transferred to our plane of existence. I couldn't control it now any more than you could control a rabbit from the woods." "There must be a way to defeat this thing," said Tove. "It can't be unkillable. Everything has a weakness." "The village guard made a heroic stand against the beast. Nothing harmed it, not a blade or otherwise." "Then we use something other than our blades," said Einar. "Such as?" There was a long moment of silence as Einar racked his brain for a solution. He'd never encountered a foe that couldn't be felled with a few good swings of an axe. Even the strange and terrifying beasts that stalked the dark hours of the night could be killed with a perfect blow from a sharp blade. All his years of experience suddenly fell flat, and he felt powerless. "Fire," said Gorm. "We used fire." Einar arched his eyebrows. "Explain." "My father works with clay. You use fire to harden it and make useful things like pots and dishes, but it turns brittle. What happens when you drop a pot? It shatters. If we heat the beast up hot enough for it to turn brittle, it'll shatter like a pot." Einar's lips curled into a proud smile. "You're right, of course," said the priest, "but we don't have a pottery oven here in the village, and even if we did, we couldn't leave the safety of the church long enough to get it lit and burning hot enough." "Then we don't leave the church," said Tove. "We lure the beast inside and burn it down." "With ourselves still in it?" asked the priest, his voice rising in pitch. "You made this mess, and your people suffered for it. We have no other choice," replied Einar. The edges of the priest's mouth turned downward and formed a crescent. Fine, but how can we get the beast inside? I have placed enchantments that prevent it from doing so. Could you place them again? Asked Tove. In theory. Lower the enchantments and draw the thing in. We'll be the bait, said Tove. Then when it has fully entered, you raise the enchantments once again, and we set the building ablaze. With the enchantments up, it won't be able to escape, and it will cook. And us along with it, said the priest. We are Northmen. Death in battle is an honor, and what better death can a warrior have than fighting a beast of such power, said Einar. The priest chuckled dryly. And you wonder why I raised such a beast in the first place. You are madmen. Tove looked up and around the church. This place is made of wood. It should burn well, but it needs to burn hot. We need to ignite a large fire. Do you have anything else that can burn? The priest thought for a moment, then nodded. There are casks of wine in the cellar. Oil, too, for the torches, too. Both should burn quite well. A battle and wine? Perhaps we'll die well tonight, said Einar. Let us prepare, boys. Tonight we may very well be dining in the hall of the War Father. Tove clutched the torch in one hand and his axe in the other as he descended the stone steps into the depths of the cellar. His light bounded down the steps ahead of him and reached the floor first. He wasn't afraid of the dark, but the idea that the very ground beneath his feet could simply swallow him whole made him feel nervous. Seeing what it had done to Lonir and the others had stained his courage. That wasn't a warrior's death. It was dishonorable and downright horrid. Would their souls even be called upon to drink and revel in the great mead hall of the High Father? Or would they be cast aside and left to fumble in the dark? Was that the fate that awaited him? He tried to push the thoughts away as he entered the wine cellar beneath the church's sanctuary. His light reached out ahead of him, illuminating a large wooden cask of wine and a second cask full of oil. If either were even a quarter of the way full, it would be enough to set the entire church ablaze. His mind again turned to the thoughts of death and his warrior's duty. Defeating the beast would likely cost all of them their lives. Einar had seemed so confident that it would earn them a place in the hall, but if the creature was no more than an animal, would it? Furthermore, to die in a blazing fire was not how he had envisioned the end of his life coming to greet him. "Do you see the wine?" called Gorm as he descended the stairs after Tove. "I see it. Yes. It should be enough to make a great fire." "Good. We'll need to spread it around. Do you see any bottles or buckets? Anything that can be used to carry it?" Gorm came up beside him and added his own torchlight. The wide depths of the room were suddenly cast in a much brighter view, and Tove felt his worries easing slightly. "There, it looks like the priest has bottles set aside. We can use those," he said. "Perfect. Grab a few." The priest kneeled in the center of the sanctuary and had begun drawing a large circle in the center of the room with a charcoal pencil. His features were tight, eyes forward as he concentrated on the lines and forms he began to wrap inside the circle. "What is this symbol?" asked Einar with a disgusted tone. "A ward of protection. I'll draw all but the last piece. I'll need to draw the last piece when the beast crosses the threshold. You and your men will need to help keep me safe until that happens, or it will have a chance to escape." "Is this the same symbol keeping us safe now?" "Yes, I drew the last one on the floor over there," replied the priest, pointing. "Now, please, no further interruptions. A single line out of place could cause the ward to fail. Both wards." Einar looked back at the doorway. They had sealed the doorway, preventing the three figures from watching their work. It was impossible to know if the beast would understand what they were planning. If it was truly just an animal, as the priest had said, it probably wouldn't recognize the trap. If it was more, it could be laying a trap of its own. The priest finished his work, and Tove and Gorm arrived shortly after. They both carried bottles of wine and oil. He ordered them to spread them all around, avoiding only the symbol the priest had just drawn and the other symbol he'd drawn previously. The trap was set. Part 3. Einar stood with his axe and shield at the ready. Both Tove and Gorm stood beside him. They looked nervous. Their fear was evident by the beads of sweat rolling down their faces, by the way they adjusted and readjusted their grip on their weapons. Yet they stood tall and proud like true warriors. If they survived today, they would no longer be pups. He would be proud to welcome them as battle brothers. "I'm breaking the seal," declared the priest. Einar didn't look back. He kept his eyes firmly planted on the door in front of him, even as he heard the priest brushing away the magical seal. There was a subtle shift in the air. It wasn't something he would have been able to put into words, but a sensation that crept into him. Their protection was now gone. Silence. Did the beast know the seal was broken? Suddenly there was a terrible blow against the wooden doors. They shook and rattled on their hinges as another slammed against the wood. A darkness crept over the windows, and through the crack beneath the door came a squirt of mud. Then the door flew open, and the window shattered. Glass and wooden splinters pelted the three warriors, and they were forced to raise their shields to defend themselves. Through the window came the mud-covered figures of the three pups, but they were not alone. There were others too. The townsfolk, who had been converted to serve the beast's needs. Through the open door came a torrent of mud. It splashed across the floor and pushed aside the pews. The three warriors raised their shields and stood shoulder to shoulder. The muddy thralls slammed against them, and the warriors swung their axes, cleaving them apart. The mud clung to their feet and rose up around them, splashing against their faces and bodies. It squeezed against their ankles, threatening to root them in place. Gorm tripped and fell beneath the brown tide and was swallowed up completely. He tried to scream, but his mouth and lungs were filled with mud, and he couldn't make more than a panicked gurgling. Einar and Tove moved backward, conceding ground to the growing and swelling wave of mud. "Keep them off me," demanded the priest. Einar gritted his teeth. How was he supposed to hold back something like this? It was beyond anything he'd ever faced. The mud thralls grabbed hold of Tove's shield and pulled him forward, threatening to pull him down into the mud. He let it go, and the shield and thralls both fell away. "I've finished," shouted the priest. "Then light the fire, and let's end this," shouted Einar. The priest crossed the room and grabbed one of the torches from the wall. The beast, sensing the trap it was now caught in, surged forward and past Einar and Tove. It moved directly towards the priest, and Einar guessed that it knew exactly what needed to be done to escape. There was no stopping it now. "It's coming your way, priest." The priest swung the torch like a club clumsily. "Leave! I will do what must be done." Einar cleaved another thrall in half before his shield was ripped away from him. "Now!" shouted the priest. "Leave this place." The mud surged around the priest's legs and knees. Einar heard the snapping of bone and the priest's pained cries. There was nothing more he could do, and if they waited, they would be dead too. He grabbed Tove's arm and yanked him forward, dashing through the open doorway. Behind them, the priest dropped the torch into the puddle of wine at his feet, and the flames roared to life. Fire raced forward in every direction and surged across the floors, spreading quickly to the walls and the ceiling. The priest, beast, and its thralls were lost in the blaze. Tove stared into the flames, breathing heavily. Einar squeezed his shoulder and let out a heavy sigh. The church had been reduced to ruined cinders. Smoke filtered from the shattered building and across the dead, silent town. As dawn broke, Einar sat down and flexed his fingers. They ached. His whole body did. "You are no longer a pup," he said as he looked over at Tove. The youth was staring at the ruined church, eyes hollow. He looked like his mind was 1,000 miles away. "They're all gone. We came here to save our clan, and now my brothers are gone. We're Northmen. Battle's our way of life. They knew that as well as anyone, and they died fighting. They didn't die with honor. Your brothers fought until the very end. Their souls are drinking mead with the Warfather even as we speak. Of that you can be assured. Come now. We have a long journey home." Thank you for listening to Northman, Horror of the Mud. If you liked that story and want to hear more, consider giving this video a like and subscribing so you never miss a story. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.